My name is Vonda, and I am 33 years old. Even now, years later, I can still recall with painful clarity the exact moment I realized my mother-in-law no longer saw me as a human being, let alone a cherished member of the family. The memory sits heavy in my chest like a stone that refuses to dissolve. It wasn't during one of her countless subtle digs at the dinner table or the time she would openly correct how I arranged things in my own home. Those moments had stung, but I had learned to absorb them. No, the true breaking point came on a quiet Tuesday evening in November. The kind of crisp autumn night where the air smells of wood smoke and fallen leaves. She had summoned the entire extended family into her living room. Her 3 daughters and their husbands, my brother-in-law Greg and his wife, 2 aunts, and my husband Trevor. I was standing just outside the kitchen doorway, carefully balancing a heavy tray of teacups and saucers I had been asked to bring out. My wrists were already aching from the weight. That's when I overheard her calm, almost rehearsed announcement, delivered in the same measured tone she used for church announcements or charity committee meetings. "Should Vonda be banned from family events?" she asked plainly, as if discussing a simple policy change rather than the woman who had spent 9 long years loving her son, raising their child, and quietly trying to build a life within this family. I froze in the dimly lit hallway, the tray trembling slightly in my hands. The porcelain cups rattled against one another like a warning. One by one, every single person in that room raised their hand. Not a single voice of hesitation. Not one person looked uncomfortable or shifted awkwardly in their seat. The silence that followed their raised hands was deafening. I didn't drop the tray. Somehow I managed to set it gently on a side table before retreating to the kitchen on unsteady legs. I stood at the sink with the water running loudly so no one would hear the way my breathing had become ragged and shallow. My chest felt hollow, as though something vital had been carved out with surgical precision. 9 years of holiday gatherings filled with forced smiles, birthday celebrations where I stayed late to clean up, hospital visits when she needed support, baby showers I helped organize, and school recitals where I sat proudly in the front row, erased in a single casual vote. What truly shattered me wasn't even the vote itself. It was what happened about 20 minutes later when my 8-year-old son, Caleb, found me in the kitchen. He has his father's warm brown eyes and my stubborn spirit. The moment he walked in and saw my face, he knew something was terribly wrong. He tugged at my sleeve with that familiar insistence, demanding my full attention the way he always does when the world feels too heavy. In a small cracking voice that I will carry with me forever, he asked, "Mom, why are they doing this?" He had been sitting quietly in the hallway the entire time. He had heard every word of his grandmother's proposal and every hand that went up in agreement. I knelt right there on the cold kitchen tiles, my knees pressing into the hard surface, and pulled him into my arms. I refused to cry in front of him. Those tears came much later, after he was safely asleep in his bed, when the house was finally quiet and I could let the sobs break free in the darkness of our bedroom. But in that moment, holding my son tightly while the sound of laughter and casual conversation drifted in from the living room like a cruel contrast, something deep inside me shifted. It grew very still. Not the silence of defeat or resignation, but the quiet, steely resolve of someone who has finally made a decision that can no longer be postponed. I want to be very clear about this. I was never a difficult daughter-in-law. I say this not to paint myself as a saint, but because the truth of who I was in that family matters for everything that followed. I cooked nourishing meals for my mother-in-law after her knee surgery, staying up late to prepare soups and easy-to-eat dishes. I drove her to every follow-up appointment when no one else volunteered, rearranging my own demanding work schedule as a medical billing coordinator. I planned and executed her entire 60th birthday celebration, booking the perfect venue months in advance, creating detailed seating charts that considered everyone's preferences, and driving 40 minutes each way to fetch the exact cake she had specifically requested, all while working full-time and essentially raising Caleb alone. Trevor's job kept him traveling 3 weeks out of every month, leaving me to handle school drop-offs, doctor visits, bedtime routines, and everything in between. The tensions between us had simmered beneath the surface for years, but they were never about anything substantial or reasonable. She disliked how I dressed Caleb for church, preferring her own stricter style. She found me too direct in conversations, meaning I spoke my mind without softening every statement into something palatable. She once told Trevor, right in front of me, that I lacked softness, meaning I refused to shrink myself, to become smaller and quieter, to fit her rigid vision of the ideal daughter-in-law. She never forgave me for that independence, for the way I maintained my own identity while still trying to show respect. The family vote was simply her way of making her long-held disapproval official and public. What none of them knew was that 3 weeks earlier, I had quietly consulted a family attorney. Trevor and I had been discussing separation for months in hushed, exhausted conversations late at night. I needed to understand my rights clearly before things grew more complicated. Ms. Caldwell, a sharp and compassionate lawyer with years of experience in family matters, had already begun gathering important documentation, detailed financial records, property assessments, and careful notes on the informal $32,000 loan from Trevor's mother. That money had been dangled over my head for years as emotional leverage, though it had never been properly documented or given clear terms. That evening, sitting on the kitchen floor with Caleb still in my arms, his small body warm against mine, I sent Ms. Caldwell one simple text: "Move forward." Those 2 words carried the weight of everything I had endured. I didn't confront anyone that night. I bathed my son with steady hands, read him his favorite bedtime story in the same soothing voice I always used, tucked him in and turned off his light. I let them enjoy their perceived victory in the living room. But the following week, a formal letter from the law firm arrived at the family home, and it changed the atmosphere completely. Trevor called me at 9:47 a.m. that Thursday, his voice shaky and uncertain in a way I had never heard in 9 years of marriage. "Vonda, my mother got something in the mail." I told him I knew. After a long, heavy silence, he asked why I hadn't warned him. My response was calm and direct. "Trevor, your entire family raised their hands to ban me while our son sat in the hallway listening." He had no real answer for that. The letter was thorough, professional, and impossible to ignore. It addressed the undocumented loan in clear legal language, proposing a structured repayment schedule, and converting the vague family favor into a formal, binding agreement with defined terms. No more gray areas. No more power plays. It also outlined the potential division of marital assets, including the equity we had built in our home, Trevor's retirement accounts, and the business profit-sharing arrangement he had entered 2 years earlier, should a separation proceed. Most powerfully, it included a formal notice regarding potential defamation. A witnessed family meeting where I was openly voted out of the family circle could be seen as coordinated reputational harm. We weren't filing a lawsuit yet, but everything was now carefully documented. The change in their behavior was almost immediate and almost surreal to witness. Trevor's mother called me directly for the first time in over 2 years. Her voice, usually sharp and commanding, was now cautious and hesitant. She spoke of possible misunderstandings. I replied evenly that there had been none. I had heard the vote with my own ears. My son had heard it too, and he had cried afterward. She tried to explain it away as an emotional evening taken out of context. I told her firmly that a vote is not a matter of context, it is a clear decision, and I had made one of my own. In the weeks that followed, there were no explosive courtroom battles or screaming matches at family dinners. Instead, Trevor and I sat down together, without his family present, for the most honest conversation we had shared in years. He is not a villain in this story, and I want to be clear about that. He was a man who had spent his entire life managing his mother's emotions and expectations, never fully understanding the quiet toll it had taken on our marriage until it was laid out in cold legal terms. We both cried during that conversation, deep, cleansing tears that had been held back for far too long. We spoke about Caleb's future, about what we each truly wanted, and about the unhealthy patterns we had silently endured for years. It wasn't an instant reconciliation, but it was raw, real, and filled with a new kind of possibility. His family's attitude softened almost overnight in ways that felt both gratifying and hollow. The aunt who had raised her hand the quickest sent a long conciliatory text message. His sister, who had helped organize the seating at that fateful meeting, suddenly became very interested in Caleb's school schedule and began mailing him thoughtful cards. I didn't respond to any of it with anger or bitterness. I no longer needed their approval or their validation. That internal shift, finally stopping the exhausting quest for acceptance from people who had never truly offered it, was the most liberating part of the entire experience. About a month later, Caleb looked up at me one quiet evening and asked if we would still be going to Grandma's house for Christmas. I told him the truth in the gentlest way I could. That things were changing, but no matter where we spent the holidays, I would make sure he felt deeply loved and completely safe. He thought about it for a long moment in that serious way only children can, and then said simply, "Good, because I didn't like how they made you feel, Mom." An 8-year-old boy had seen everything clearly. Life didn't suddenly become easy or simple after that Thursday letter arrived. There were difficult months filled with tough legal discussions, emotional ups and downs, and many sleepless nights where doubt crept in. But through it all, I have never regretted sending that text to Miss Caldwell. Not for a single moment. What I want every woman who reads this to remember is this: silence is not weakness, and patience is not surrender. Sometimes the most powerful response is to stop explaining yourself to people who refuse to understand you, and simply let your next move speak for itself with quiet strength. They held a vote to remove me from the family. What they didn't realize was that I had already chosen to outgrow them entirely, and that quiet, deliberate, deeply personal decision of mine silenced them more completely than any argument or confrontation ever could.